Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's class, Tonal Value Flower Studies using Artist Loft Graphite. And I am your instructor, Adrienne Hodge, and joining you from my studio here in Austin, Texas today. And I see we've got a lot of folks also joining us from Texas. One of our regulars, Barbara from Denton, and that's all I saw popping up. Just saying hi to Barbara, I guess. Anyway, welcome everyone. It's always so nice to see so many familiar and new faces in these classes. Oh, give me just a moment. My battery on my laptop is barking at me. Let's make sure that's plugged in. Okay, so tonight's class is going to be using some reference photos that I shared with you along with the supply list of some flowers. And there are a few different flowers going on here, but I really wanted what we're doing tonight to be something that you can apply to a number of subjects, not just these flowers. And so the focus is really going to be on light and how to achieve the full range of tonal value using graphite. So we'll talk about that as we get started here. And then next week, we're going to continue talking about value and very dramatic value using these same reference photos of these flowers. And we'll be using pen and ink next week. So it'll be pen and ink flower studies using those Artist Loft illustration pens that you can find at Michael's. And then our third class, or my third class of March. I feel like I always say we because it's it's us. We all come together and do these classes together. So in the third class that I have planned for March, we'll be doing a monochromatic study of little nature item using Artist Loft gouache, which is opaque watercolor. If you're not familiar, we've had a number of classes on gouache, so I'm excited to continue on with that. And I'm going to go ahead and switch to my tabletop view and go over supplies, and we'll get started with tonight's class. So don't forget to tag your work with the hashtags Make It With Michael's or Michael's Classes, wherever you tag, share your work online. And you can find me online by going to my link tree. So it's just linktree/Adrienne Hodge, and you can find upcoming classes with Michael's on there. If you're in the Austin area, you can see what I've got going on, maybe at my studio or through the Contemporary Austin Art School at Laguna Gloria, where I teach in-person classes. And here's some of my artwork on my business cards using calligraphy ink. We'll just set all that aside. Okay, and then we are using an Artist Loft drawing pad tonight. Little 9x12 drawing pad, and then I've got the Artist Loft graphite pencils here, and I got an eraser and a couple of erasers and my sharpener, and I have a whole bunch of Artist Loft graphite pencils here, a little mixture. And then our reference photo that we're using, let me just pull that up here. Several reference photos, and all showing black and white versions of these flowers, and some of them are a little bit more dramatic than others, where I turned up the contrast when editing the photos to make all of the dark values even darker and the light values even lighter. So we'll be using these images, and there are 4 of them, but we're only going to be drawing 2 of them. So if you want to draw all 4, or do different ones than the 2 that I'll be focusing on, you are more than welcome to. Okay, so let me just move some stuff out of the way here and start talking about tonal value. But before I do that, real quick, here's a little preview of next week's class using the illustration pens. So same images, just using illustration pens, and we'll be using a lot of stippling, the little dots of value. next week. And we will also be using the illustration paper. So I've got this Artist Loft Crystal Vellum illustration paper for next week. If you haven't picked that up yet. All right, so I'm going to get to a blank page in my sketchbook. We're going to do some preliminary sketching. So we may fill up a few pages of scratch paper here or a few pages in your sketchbook, just starting to talk about value. All right, so I had an entire class on graphite basics for beginners, which our lovely moderator, Nicoria, can drop the link to a YouTube playlist that has a number of my classes listed there. And so if you are new to drawing with graphite and you need some help on what I'm talking about tonight, then you might check out that class. It talks about all of the letters and numbers on the side of the pencils and what those letters and numbers mean, and just the basics of tonal value shading. And I'm going to go over the basics a little bit here, but I'm not going to do as much of a deep dive as I did in that class because that would be redundant. So I'm just getting my pencil nice and sharpened here, and I accidentally just broke that pencil. So I'm just going to use a different one. And you should use whatever pencil you feel most comfortable with and that you prefer, if you know what that is, to get started. Or I always recommend that you use a pencil that has a letter H on it for hard so that you can draw nice and light on the side of that H pencil and easily erase your lines. But I'm going to be using a darker pencil just because if I don't, my lines will not show up on the Zoom here. So you don't have to use the exact same pencil that I am using. That is always the number one question that gets asked in these classes is what pencil am I using? So you should use an H pencil so that you can easily erase. And I'm going to use a B pencil pretty much the whole time, except for, yeah, I'm going to use a B pencil probably the whole time just so that my lines will show up on the page. Okay, so let's talk about tonal value. Tonal value is just smooth, continuous value that continues on. So think about tone in music, how a tone is sort of carried and it is continuous. It tends to be pretty smooth, whatever it is, right? So we're trying to get this smooth, even, continuous value to happen using the side of our pencil. And when you're using the B pencils, the higher the number on the B pencil, the softer and darker your marks are going to be. So that was a 4B that I was using there. But if I use a 6B, I can go even darker with that tonal shading. So we're just going to make a little bit of a value scale here from 0 to 10. So let's draw a long, skinny rectangle. Does not have to be perfect. And we're going to label it 0 and 10. This is our value scale. Okay, so our 0 is going to be our blank paper. Because this week and next week we are working on white paper. And if you were working on toned paper and you had some white, then you could actually add the white in, but we're going to use our blank paper as our 0 or our absolute white values. And then our 10 value is our absolute black. So no paper, excuse me, no paper peeking through. So you can use your 6B, your 8B, maybe your 4B to get that 10 value to happen. So you want it nice and smooth, no paper peeking through. And then you'll let up on your pressure, maybe switching to a lower B pencil like the 4B or a 2B for those darker values. And again, this does not have to be perfect. It can go outside of the lines. If all you're looking for is a gradual shift from dark to a mid-tone. And then you want to meet somewhere in the middle, make that shift happen gradually. And then you can take a 2B or maybe an HB or a regular B pencil for your mid-tone to start to get into your lighter values. And then for the lightest values, you want to use your H pencils, like your 2H or your H, and then your 4H for your lightest values. And so by the time you get to a 0, you've just got this baby's breath of graphite, nice and light on the page. And then you're gradually meeting somewhere in the middle, and you're keeping that all smooth and continuous. So using the side of the pencil and really using your entire arm to draw. So you're locking your wrist and you're using an entire whole arm movement so that you can really be nice and soft with the side of that pencil. So we are rarely going to point our pencil this way, especially when we are using an H pencil, because then that's just going to get lines sticking into the page that we can't erase. And that class on Graphite Basics talks in depth for quite a while about the benefits of how we can hold our pencil with less pressure at an angle in order to get those smooth, continuous movements to happen and to not press down so hard and carve into our paper with those H pencils. Okay, so that's tonal value. So tonal value is smooth and continuous. Just gonna write tonal value here on the top. And then next week we'll be using some pen and ink shading techniques, particularly stippling, which is just the dots. And you can check out that playlist that we shared in the chat on classes titled stippling, scribbling, hatching, cross hatching, or anything to do with pen and ink is all going to talk about those shading techniques. And I've had a number of classes on those shading techniques because I've been doing this for approaching 4 years now, which is very exciting. So anyway, moving on. Okay, so we've got that tonal value scale, and we really are going to be staying on this end of our really dramatic ends of this value scale tonight with our value shading here. So it's going to be the extremely dark values and the extremely light values, and just a little bit of the midtones. So, and really there's not even that much of the light values. It's really a lot of these darker values, a little bit of midtones, and then blank paper. So we're really working with implied line, the implied nature of a form, which is another topic that I've covered in other classes. If you want to search on YouTube or the Michaels website for classes on implied line, had a number of classes on that topic. So, and we also have a number of classes that I've done on graphite. And one of the biggest struggles is always making my drawings show up on the Zoom when we work with graphite, especially when we're starting nice and light and building up to dark. And the last time we worked with it, I said, don't worry, these upcoming graphite classes, that's not going to be an issue because we're going super dark with these. So we shouldn't have too much of an issue with you not seeing my drawing. But before we get started on these main studies here, I am going to draw pretty light when I first put in the kind of under sketch of these. So I want to zoom in on the forms of these flowers and go general to specific and just show you how to get started drawing them, because I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with, is just what shapes and lines do I use to get started on this drawing? Okay, so even though we're going to do these boxes, these little thumbnail studies kind of small, and I'm going to use one of my business cards actually to trace these boxes. I've been using a playing card quite a bit and doing these little rectangular frames, but I was like, oh, let's use a square frame this time. But I'm going to zoom in and make it nice and big on my paper just to do just to help you with the preliminary sketching. And then I will draw it small and I'll do it again nice and light. But I want to do both of these zoomed in. This is what you're going to draw on your little box that we'll do in just a moment. And you can go ahead and do that if you'd like. In fact, let me just demonstrate that really briefly. So if you take a business card or any, maybe, I don't know, what you might have lying around. Oh, a Post-it. My Post-it note is also, maybe I used my Post-it notes. They're the same size. But we're just going to trace that. It's a little trick that I picked up from a good friend of mine, another teacher, Jenny Granberry, who you can find lots of her classes on YouTube as well. She is a really fun art teacher friend of mine. And yeah, just picked up this little trick of using a business card to make a fun little thumbnail that has a nice frame to it in your sketchbook. So this, what I'm about to draw, excuse me, I can't get a hold of my voice tonight. What I'm about to draw on this big paper would be the first lines that you would sketch inside of there just to get started here. Okay, so we want to go general to specific. That means we want to start with the general two-dimensional shapes that we're seeing within these three-dimensional forms. And since I just drew on the page behind this page, it's kind of showing through and bothering me. So I'm just gonna put a blank piece of paper behind it real quick. If I can find a blank piece of paper in this other sketchbook. So we want to end up with a spherical shape for these particular flowers. And I looked up the name of the flowers when I was planning this class, but that was 2 months ago. And now it is escaping me. But I love these and I have them dried all over my house. They're usually yellow, like little orbs. Okay, so we're looking for a sphere for those. And then we're looking for the rose shape, which is like a cinnamon bun, or all these petals that are folded in on themselves, a bit like a pinwheel. And then it's more like a cereal bowl or a cup when we're looking at the rose from the side. So we're going to start with a circle, and then we're going to start with the cereal bowl shape, and we're going to start with another little half circle for the rose. But in order to get them in the right places, I'm going to use a little trick that I used to use when I taught at a paint and sip establishment, and that was to take your fingers and measure how far down into the frame before the shape starts. So if you're doing it on a small scale already, you can say, well, it's about 2 fingers down, and then that's where this bulbous shape is going to start. So we're just going to draw a circle, but it's going to be eclipsed by the side of the frame. So we're just looking for a circle there. And I went back to my H pencil instead of my B pencil for some reason. And using that whole arm movement is going to help you be nice and loose here. And then we're just going to look for a cereal bowl shape here. And we want there to be a little bit of a space gap between that shape and that shape. And maybe you go ahead and draw the entire cereal bowl, because you're drawing it nice and light with your H pencil and it can be easily erased. And then we'll do another little circle that goes off the side of the frame up here, and then another little circle as well. And those are going to be eclipsed and overlapping each other. And then we can do another little cereal bowl shape inside of that cereal bowl shape. And then we've got this big rose eclipsing our cereal bowl, but we want to leave that space in between them. It's very important that we get some space there. So we're not going to worry about the specific shapes yet. We're just doing a nice big circle. And then to start to see that pinwheel shape that's inside of there, and rather than thinking about a pinwheel, although maybe you draw a pinwheel or a cinnamon bun sort of situation to help you see that spiral to get started here. But then we want to look at these value shapes. So the shapes of shadows and the shapes of light to get more specific. So as we start to go from general to specific here, we're going to be looking for shapes like this. Just get the reference photo here in front of us. So this is the one that I made. I turned up the value on it, and I did zoom in a little bit. So I'm looking at it more like that-ish. But we want to look for these organic shapes. So I see them as maybe little crescent moon shapes. They're not perfect crescent moons, but they're sort of like this, a little wavy. And they do not have to be perfect. They don't have to be exactly like in the photo. We don't need them. We don't need it to look like this particular rose. We just want it to look like a rose. And our focus tonight is on the value. So we really just want to make sure we give ourselves enough of these wonky little crescent shapes to be able to add all of this dramatic value to them. So that's how we're starting to get more specific there. And to get more specific on our bulbous flower here, we're going to zoom in and start to notice the shapes of shadows and the shapes of light here. And when we zoom in, it really takes on some interesting shapes. And I see a lot of little heart shapes in here. So I'm going to start with, let me get that out of the way because it's going to mess with my zoom lighting. But I'm going to start with some little heart shapes because why not? It's fun and it keeps us from getting too serious and annoyed with the process to make it a little fun. And then we can start to get these wonkier little shapes. And again, it doesn't have to look like this particular flower. We just want it to look like a flower like this. So all of these shadows are hugging the round spherical form. So they really need to create a big crescent moon shape all together. So all together, we're creating a big shadow right here, like a big crescent moon on the side of this spherical shape. But within that, we're just looking for these little dark shapes, and then we're going to be leaving some blank paper here. So like little islands or little wonky heart shapes and circles. And we're just looking at the photograph. You can look at the white shapes or you can look at the dark shapes and just get something in that ballpark like that. Okay, so those are the general shapes that we're going to start to make more specific as we go. And I'm going to do that again with the other image, and then I will draw it again nice and small, and we'll start adding all this dramatic value to it. Let me zoom in on the other image. Oh, but wait, actually, let me point out some of those more specific shapes on this rose at the top. So same idea, we're looking for these organic shapes on the petals. The light is telling us everything we need to know. And I told myself to not get in the weeds too much tonight and just focus on what you all need to know to make this value study happen. So that's what I'm going to try to do, is just keep coming back to our touchstones here of let's look for the shapes of shadows and light And I think this study is going to turn out nicely for everyone if we make that our focus and don't get too in the weeds about specifics or about how to render a sphere and all that stuff. I've done plenty of classes on those topics before. Okay, so let me get another big square here, big practice square, so I can zoom in, because I've noticed a lot of the questions that I get in the chat in these classes lately. Sometimes people are a little frustrated with not being able to get started when they can't see my lines when I draw super light in the beginning. So I wanted to make sure that I zoom in and I draw nice and dark and show you those first marks that I'm making on the page and just draw them nice and dark so you can see them. Okay, so now looking at this image, and honestly, these are the types of images that you want as a beginner. And I tell my students in all of my classes this all the time. Just that you can make things, you can go really easy on yourself if you make sure that the images that you're working for have really dramatic lighting like this. It just limits the amount of think work that you have to do to figure out what you're looking at because it's so obvious. These shapes are just a little more obvious. So again, we've got a few different spheres that are overlapping each other. So we're not going to worry about how to draw a sphere or how to get it exact. We're going to look at our frame and notice how far down, how far up is this first sphere that's kind of hanging out by itself up here. So we'll try to get that in the same place. You really want to get it as close to the same spot in the frame as possible as the image, because our negative space is really important as far as having this light behind it to push the dark forward or to have the dark to push the light forward. So make sure that you leave enough space for all of these forms, and especially the spaces in between them, because that's going to help this contrast happen. Okay, so we've got the little stem of the flower there, and then keeping it pretty similar to how we see it in the image. I'm just looking at these general shapes here, looking at the negative space, because I want to make sure I have the same gap. And then this flower is not quite a perfect circular sphere. It's a little more like an oval. So we want to kind of smash it down and stretch it out a little bit. And we just want to leave space for that stem. And then I kind of just drew this shape right here of the other one that's being eclipsed. And then we want that one to be eclipsed by this fourth one here. And we just want to make sure that this space happens. Spaces in between them. So really just trying to get all of those circles to happen in a way where there are gaps in between them, and you can kind of trace where that stem would go behind it so it sticks out. And so we've got this little keyhole of light happening there. And then we've got this big leaf shape. And really, again, just looking at the negative space that I have between those objects can help me get that shape in the way I want it. And then this rose, let's not even worry about it or think about it being a rose. We're just going to draw these shapes of the petals overlapping each other and all those little crescent shaped folds over here. We're going to let that be nice and implied. Don't worry about the details there. Just looking at those general shapes. And then we'll zoom in on our image and start to get a little more specific here. And again, not worried about how do I turn this into a sphere. We're just going to let the light guide us. and look at those little circles. They don't feel as much like heart shapes in this one, but they do kind of have a little bit of like a little bean shape to them in some places. So maybe you make them more bean shaped. Actually, they are kind of heart shaped, but it's more the light that's heart shaped in some places right here. But definitely thinking about as a whole, it's going to be more of a, not a crescent moon, but like a quarter moon or a gibbous. I guess it is still a crescent, but the light is the crescent and the shadow is more of a, this is the main shadow area. And then we've got some light hitting it here in the middle, and it's more of a mid-tone shadow, and then it gets very dark over here on this side. So we don't really need a whole lot of shapes. This is where it's just going to be solid tonal shading in a lot of places. Well, maybe not solid, but it's going to get pretty dark in there. Okay, and you can kind of do a little, think about a heart rate monitor. So heart rate monitor goes like this. That's what you want around the outer edge here, because the light in the background is really gonna create this dark. We need this darkness right here to follow the outer shape of the flower. And then same sort of thing here. We're looking for this big shadow across most of these flowers, but just with a little bit of light hitting them. Just letting that light guide us. Okay, those are our very general and a little specific lines that we're going to start with. So now I am just going to go to another blank page and get my final studies mapped out here. And I'll do that again. And maybe you might not be able to see my lines, but it will be okay because we just drew them together nice and big. Or I drew them nice and big. Maybe you drew them small already. I am going to use an H pencil right now, just in case I need to erase something as I'm getting started here. So I'm just lining these up on the left side of the page. I think that makes a nice composition in my sketchbook to do it that way. You could always do all four of these images and balance them out. Okay, so I'm just going to start with those basic light lines again. Just going to look at my image and do everything I just did nice and quickly with my H pencil. So some proportions in my quick little preliminary drawing were maybe a little off, and I am looking a little more closely now to get those proportions a little closer to what I'm seeing in the photo, but I'm not too worried about it being exactly like the photograph here. And then I'm just getting a few of those darker shadows. These I am looking to be as close to what I'm seeing in the center of the flower as possible. And I will definitely make these lines darker in just a moment, but I'm making all those little crescent moon shapes fold in on each other in a way that creates that pinwheel pattern. And if drawing roses is something that you're wanting more of, I've had an entire series of classes called Flower Fundamentals that you can find in that playlist or by searching on YouTube or the Michaels website. And I've done roses, datura flowers, orchids. There have been so many. There were a few others, but they're escaping me at the moment. Hydrangeas. We did passion flowers a while back, or pretty recently, actually. Okay. So just got all those preliminary shapes in there, and now we're ready to start creating this drama. And if you are left-handed like me, you are definitely going to want a blank piece of paper, like just a piece of copy paper, or maybe a page that you tear out of your sketchbook to lay down on your sketchbook while you're drawing, so that you're not putting your hand into your drawing constantly, because this graphite will get smeared around quite a bit if you don't. And maybe that might happen to right-handed people as well, but it seems to happen more to left-handed people since we're going back into our drawings a little bit more with our hands. But using a piece of paper to protect your drawing is something everyone can do. Okay, and I'm trying to sharpen this pencil and it's not cooperating with me again. All right, so this is where you're really going to want those heavy B pencils, like your 8B or your 6B. I even have a 12B here, hardcore. Okay, so you definitely want those nice soft B pencils.
Hi, Adrian. Would you be able to zoom in?
Oh, let's see.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's going to get easier to see as I start to add all this value too. If I go too far, then my camera just gets in my way. Okay, so I'll try to keep the other drawing on the screen at the same time. I just move my light around just a bit here because moving the camera made my shadow a little bigger. Okay. So we're going to start with these really heavy B pencils. I'm going to just start with my 8B here, but I want to keep it nice and soft. So the first thing we're going to do is start in these dark corners because it gets solid black in these dark corners, right? Now I'm so zoomed in, I can't show you my image. But right here in these dark areas of the corner of the image, we're going to solid black. So we're going to use the side of that super soft B pencil and just, we're not going to go super dark and press down right away. We're going to start soft and we're going to build up to making it darker. And I like to think about using like a diagonal hatching line to fill in large areas really fast. So you could take the side of your pencil and just start to fill in these large hatching areas, or you can use smooth, continuous little circles. And maybe if you go outside of your frame a little bit, you could clean it up using my kneaded eraser to do that. But we're just going to gradually start to fill in this dark value. And then go over that and use a little more pressure on the pencil, or you can continue doing those diagonal hatching lines, and we'll go ahead and get all of this dark value in between. And so by doing this, we're just creating that drama right off the bat. and hopefully starting to make these shapes and forms come forward a little bit just by nature of having all of the dark, making the light areas stand out because there's a lot of dark in this image. So we're just setting the tone, pun intended, for all of this drama here by starting to fill in the dark first, and then we'll build on this as we hone in on these more specific shapes of value that we're seeing. If it seems kind of blurry right now, it's because my drawing is very blurry. Nothing is very crisp and clean yet because I'm using this hazy tonal value just to start to create that darkness that we're going to keep building on. And then we could go ahead and draw in all those little shapes that we talked about before. Those little heart shapes, if you haven't already. Or the white shapes. And you definitely want to take note of where some of those white shapes are. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but having a few of these little white petals showing through is going to really create depth and the 3 dimensions that we're looking for here. Okay. And then same thing, we'll start to add that tonal value, but we really want to try to curve as we add this tonal value. And think about the roundness of this flower and this sphere. And if that's a new concept to you, all of that is covered in the graphite basics class that I mentioned. We even draw a sphere using graphite and all of the shading techniques in that class to really emphasize how you can use all these different value applications to turn a 2-dimensional shape like a circle into a 3-dimensional shape like a sphere. But for now, I'm just noticing where those white spaces are. Maybe if you have to circle them a little bit, make them stand out for yourself if they start to get a little blurry. And then now we'll go ahead and start to put a little more pressure on our pencil and go ahead and fill in the areas in between those with some really nice solid black. So you might be pointing your pencil more towards your paper as you're doing this, but just try to keep it still pretty soft. You're using the full pressure, but you're keeping it soft. And I also was trying to keep that idea of like a diagonal hatching line going throughout most of this so that it all feels really connected and tied together. I have just been talking about one idea, a concept a lot lately that feels worth repeating here because we're definitely using this device in this particular study, and that is directing a viewer's attention where you want them to look. We're creating a focal point in our drawing, and we're kind of manipulating the viewer into looking where we want them to look. And so where we want them to look is all of these interesting moments, these transitional moments from dark to light. So we're really paying special attention in these areas where it shifts from dark to light. To create this dramatic effect. I'm just thinking about that overall crescent moon shape that we talked about here that circles this. And I don't know about y'all, but one thing that I run into when I'm drawing is that if I stay in one area for too long, I start to get a little lost or start to overwork things a bit. So this is a good opportunity at this point, I think, to jump around and jump to some of the other flowers and then come back. But if you want to keep developing this one, if that feels natural to you, then go ahead. But I'm going to move up here and start thinking about this transitional moment where it transitions from dark to light at the edge of this rose. And maybe I might use my eraser a little bit here to clean up this edge because I want a really clean edge here where this petal hits the dark because it goes from absolute black to absolute white blank paper right here. So I want to really focus on that moment. And again, I'm kind of keeping that energy of my diagonal hatching line here. And then again, right here where this cereal bowl shape points up. And then I've got this big shadow, feels like a very ghost-like. And then this one off the side of the petal. Lots of little bean shapes or maybe like a bird flying in the sky. I like to think of what other shapes shadows look like or value shapes look like other than what they actually are, and that helps me. So some of these are a little more mid-toned shapes on this rose. They're not quite as dark, but I can go ahead and draw them and start to put in the dark value where I'm seeing it. Or if you want to just go ahead and apply the appropriate value that you're seeing wherever you want in the drawing, you're carving out your own journey here. I'm just bouncing around and noticing all these little light and dark shapes and focusing on these transitional moments from dark to light and making sure that I've got a nice clean edge where I want it and that it goes nice and dark at the edge. And instead of laying down that first layer of tonal value, you could just jump straight to making it absolute dark, but I think laying down that first layer allows it to really emerge organically and not feel forced. Okay, and then we'll look for that little heart rate monitor shape around the outside of this flower. And then again, keeping it nice and soft. And trying to keep that diagonal, keep the activation of this diagonal hatching line so that this background all feels connected. Because if I was going all different directions with my shading, like going like this, and then like this, and then like this, those lines might end up feeling kind of distracting. But if I keep it all smooth and continuous, now I'm putting a bunch of graphite on this page that I'm gonna smear around. But that's okay, I'll just smear it more on this paper and not on my drawing. But if I keep the idea of that diagonal hatching line as I'm adding the darker value and by laying down that first layer of graphite, it should all feel nice and smooth and continuous. And I just think it's easier to build up to this absolute black rather than just going for it. You'll hurt your hand, honestly. Much easier and more enjoyable to draw by gradually increasing the pressure that you're applying. If you're hurting your hand while you're drawing, I think you're doing it wrong. Although I did have a student a while back who said they just could not loosen their grip on their supplies, that they were always really bearing down on everything. And I was like, maybe some yoga would help. More yoga, more relaxation in our lives. Okay, so now let's get into some of these petals over here. So these are the ones where, again, we want to make sure a few of these shapes are a little more like we're actually seeing them. So like this big boomerang shape over here on the side. Some of these smaller little crescent moon and boomerang shapes. Just noticing where all of these shapes start to fold in on each other. Like a pinwheel. And even though I have my reference photo off the screen right now, I'm looking at it quite a bit, looking back and forth between the photo and my drawing, trying to make sure I get these shapes as closely as how I'm seeing them in the photo as possible. This is just gonna make it easier if I do it that way. And I'm still just using the same 8B. It's a lot of dark value in this drawing tonight, so you might be finding yourself using the same B pencil for the whole thing as well. Okay. And then we have another moment right here where I kind of left out this lighter petal that is visible. I left it out and I kind of just jumped to this one. There is one petal in here that's pretty dark, but you can still see it. So maybe if you have that one in there, you could erase it back out like I just did. And then really push the dark on the side of it. But we still want it to have some value to it. I feel like that doesn't look as natural as if I had it in there from the beginning. Like in this one, I left it blank paper a little more in the beginning. So maybe I'll just take it out this time. I don't want to force it. But it did kind of create a little more interest in the other drawing, but that's okay. So I'm just going to notice some of these mid-tone values here on these petals. And maybe some of these little edges here. Again, we don't have to get it exactly like we see it in the photo. We just want to notice what is it in the photograph that catches our attention right there, and just put a little bit of shadow or light wherever you're seeing it on that rose, and especially in those transitional moments where it goes from one flower to the next. And then in these really dark shadows inside of the rose, we definitely want to get that 10 value going and have that soft mid-tone value near it, because there's a back and forth shift from dark to mid-tone values throughout the center of the rose. All right, now we're just kind of in the home stretch of this drawing. Maybe, yeah, now would be a good time for me to switch to some of my other pencils. So an H pencil is a great choice for these lighter values to slowly start super light using the side of the pencil and start to gradually increase. And then you can always switch to a B pencil. I find it's easier, and this might just be a personal preference, could be different for everybody, but I feel like it's easier to start out slow and gradually increase your pressure. But that's not always how I start. Sometimes, like with this one, we started with the dark and we shifted to the light. But in these light areas, there's no harm in making it light first and then going back in and adding the dark. And you're just going to get more variation that way too than you would if you just made everything super dark. You definitely want some of these other values represented here. And there is a really soft gradual shift happening on some of these rose petals. And again, you want to keep your value hugging the curve of this crescent or spherical shape here so that you don't get it. It would feel flat if you did this inside of this rose, if you were going all different directions. So you definitely want this smooth, continuous value to happen in a way that follows the curve. And then as we get a little more specific with these values, really zooming in on that image to see all of these little detail moments will really start to sell it. So like some of the little vein-like value that you might be seeing on the rose petals, or some more specific shapes in the shadows over here. I'm switching back and forth between my H and B pencils now, so I can get that first layer of a lighter value to happen that's following the curve of the rose. And then I'm adding the darker value where I see it. And then another thing you can do to really emphasize and create interest is to take a nice sharp B pencil and get in here and define some of these edges of these petals, like do a nice loose line like this in some places. Just really push the organic nature of the rose. And just clean up these edges all the way around and add that nice 10 value to the background everywhere you might have missed it, like I did, and that's just gonna push the light forward. So lots of little tricks that we're using tonight. The negative space, especially using that really high contrast dark light. So contrast means that it's different, it's highly different. So when you're turning up the contrast, when you're editing a photo, you're making all of the darks darker and all of the lights lighter, and it just makes the image pop a little bit. So yeah, just by pushing that 10 value that I just did right there, it really starts to make that rose come forward now. And then I'm really just looking at some of these light shapes that I'm seeing back here and just doing more of an implied line thing. So I'm just drawing the idea of these flowers back there in the background. Don't need a whole lot of detail on those. Keeping that diagonal hatching line going. So this all feels nice and connected. Maybe putting in a few of these little organic, little implied shapes. And then I'm just gonna do one more layer to this background to get it where there's no paper peeking through. So it's just like a nice solid black there, and that's gonna really push that high contrast that we're looking for. So this is definitely not a graphite study for people who are afraid to go super dark with their graphite. We're really pushing ourselves here to go as dark as we possibly can. No paper peeking through, because if you don't, then it just doesn't have that same effect. So if you're one of those people who is afraid, and you're not alone, there's a lot of them. I meet them all the time. Just go for it. It's just a drawing study. You can always not show it to anyone if you don't like it. You want to be able to see this drawing from 20 feet away, maybe even tell what it is. And it's interesting, high contrast images like this are some of the first images that babies are able to see. And they always make baby books with high contrast colors, like Goodnight Moon is very popular board book for babies, and it's got all the red and green in it, which are highly contrasting complementary colors. But they also make a bunch of black and white high contrast art cards that I bought for my kids when they were babies. And it's just interesting how they can respond at such a young age to images like this. So you can show your drawing to a baby is what I'm trying to say, and they will appreciate it because it's so high contrast. That was the point I was making. I'm not just randomly talking about baby eyesight. Or maybe I am. All right, that's pretty good. We got one drawing down, and I tend to do this a lot in these classes where there's one that takes us a lot longer than the other drawing. And so that's the one I started with because this one has a lot more dark value than the other one. I mean, it obviously is very highly contrasted, but now all of the dark value is on our flowers and it's mostly light in the background. So it's not going to take us as long, is my point. Okay, so I'll get the other drawing on the screen again. Scoot this up. Or I could have just moved my camera down. That would have made more sense than scooting that up. Get it nice and centered here. Okay. So I'm gonna draw it again. You maybe already have it drawn. Be very mindful that I have all that negative space. Oh dear, I have zoomed in a little more than I should have. I'm like always trying to draw a little bigger in these classes, but now I'm not giving myself enough room for all three of these bulbs. So I'm gonna go a little smaller with my lollipop. Feels like a lollipop. Make sure I get that little keyhole shape of light in there. And then this other rose is definitely not the star of this drawing. It's more of a supporting character. And it's just kind of over here, hanging out with all its little background shapes. Not too worried about it. My best friend and I have been saying align to each other a lot lately, and I feel like I keep saying it in these Michael's classes, and maybe nobody realizes it's a little joke to myself, but we're like, don't even worry about that. Don't even worry about that rose in this drawing. It's like when you can see an audience on a animated cartoon and we're focused on the characters on the stage and the audience is just a big silhouetted blob. That's what this rose is like. Okay, now this one is not quite big enough either. So I'm just adjusting my circles so that I can get them to all overlap in a way that feels proportionally like the ones in the photograph. And I definitely want those little keyhole moments of light peeking through. Okay, and then this time we're gonna focus right off the bat on those little heart rate monitor shapes on the outside edge of all of our. If anybody wants to drop it in the chat what these flowers are called. I looked it up before and then I should have written it down at the bottom of the page. I love them, but what are they called? It starts with a G, I think. I could be wrong. Oh, Deb says an allium. Maybe. Why did I think it started with a G? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and this time draw that shape of the shadow in there just to give myself a gomophrenia. Maybe. Boy, that sounds like a flower name for sure. And it starts with a G. Okay, and then we'll notice these little white moments again. That's it. Lynn got it. Lynn T. Caspedia flowers. Thank you, Lynn. C, not a G. Yeah, Caspedia. Beautiful name. Okay, so I'm just noticing all those that overall big shadow that we're trying to create. This one back here is very dark, but we're still going to look for a few little light moments on it. Okay, and then we'll start to notice this outer edge of the rose where it's sticking up its particular little moments. Like there's this fun little flap, kind of flaps up like that. All those little details are just going to give it character, even though we're going to let it be a background supporting character. Okay, so where are our little focal points that we're trying to draw the viewer's eye to? The first one is right here, this little light edge that comes in contact with this very dark moment of this Caspedia flower in the background. So this is why we want to get all these overlapping moments in the right place. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Especially because this one is so eclipsed that by this one that we can't see the other side of it. So you want to make sure that all of that overlapping happens in roughly the right place, because we're really using the background light here to push these shadows forward, or switch that, using the shadows to push the light forward. Okay, so again, we'll start out super soft, even though we're going to gradually increase our pressure. And we want there to be some variation in this darkness. We don't want it to be a solid black, as the only thing that's going to be solid black in this one is that leaf. So in fact, let's go ahead and start to add our soft value to that leaf. I'm going to use my 8B or my darker B pencils. I'm using my 4B. That's not going to cut it. So if you can, try to go the same direction with your tonal shading the whole time. That's going to keep it from looking too wonky. Back when I used to teach middle school, I called that craftsmanship. You want to have good craftsmanship. You want to keep all your lines going the same direction. Not that there's anything wrong with loose, messy lines. I'm a big fan of messy lines. My son draws all different directions with his shading. He's in 3rd grade, and I just love the stylistic quality of everything that he draws like that. But you know, when you're an art teacher in public schools, you have to grade something. So craftsmanship was the difference between an A- and an A+. Not that I'm advocating for neat and tidy being the best way to draw, but you know, a lot of people want their drawings to look sort of seamless. They don't want to see the hand of the artist. They want it to be sort of photorealistic. And if that's what you're going for, then you want to try to keep those lines following the contours of the form, but also keeping your lines going in the same direction of whatever you start with. Okay, and then we'll start to build up these dark values on our Caspedia flowers. So glad we finally got the name of them, so I don't just keep calling them lollipops and bulbs all during the class. And how are we doing on time? We're good. This one's gonna go so much faster. And yeah, I like to bounce around. So I'm going to bounce around up here to this one and just. The other reason I like to bounce around is the same reason that I tell students in a painting class in a large studio to step back, get 5 or 6 feet away from your painting. And same thing with your drawing, you know, try not to have your face right up on the drawing the whole time. And if you put a little bit of value all over the place in the drawing, then if you do take a moment to step back away from it, it's just easier to see where it's going. but I do have an artist friend who does the opposite of that. Every time she draws or paints something, she starts in one corner and just fully develops it all the way across. And my brain does not work that way. But if yours does, by all means, do what makes sense to you. If you don't want to jump around, that's fine with me. Maybe it's a little bit ADHD of me. Like, I'm bored. I have to draw this Caspedia now. So yeah, this time, rather than using that background to push the light forward, we're using the shadows here to create this very stark silhouetted shadow. I mean, they're not fully silhouetted, but feels highly silhouetted. And then we'll get our little shadow on the side of the stem. Almost solid black here on the bottom of the stem. And that's what creates that little keyhole of light peeking through there. And so we want to end up pretty dark on these shadows. But I think having a lot of variation in these is key to creating depth. Because if we just shaded them in all solid black, it might not create the same amount of interest and depth. So I'm just slowly building up and noticing some of those little light moments that I want to emphasize, like we did in the last drawing. And then especially there's this one little moment over here of reflective light that's happening. So I want to preserve some light here at the edge of this flower. And the way I can push that forward is by pushing the shadow at the edge of it over here on the one that it's overlapping. So if I go really dark right here on this Caspedia, that's going to push the light of that one forward. And it looks that dark in the photo. One thing that I did not do to these reference photos that I usually do, but again, I was trying not to overwhelm any beginners in this class. With this one, I wanted it to be pretty easy to follow. But normally with a lot of the reference images that I provide in a light study, especially, I will include an inverted version of the photo, which means all of the light is showing up dark and all of the dark is showing up light. So it's like a X-ray or negative version of the photo. And that really helps me to see those light shapes. So you might do that if you know how to invert the photo in Photoshop, or if you search for classic invert function on your phone, it'll allow you to invert everything on your phone or your iPad. Or there's a free app that I use called Phonto, 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 because it adds text to images and it's a free app. It's got lots of annoying ads, but it has a filter on it that will invert the light. So that's the one I use a lot to invert. And that could be really helpful. But I feel like this photo is already so, these photos are already so dramatic that the light and dark shapes are pretty obvious. I didn't think that that was necessary, and I thought it might just add an extra layer of unnecessary information to the class, so I didn't. But it might help if you're having a hard time seeing these shapes. For some reason, seeing it reversed just really helps me to see those shapes. So if we were looking at the inverted one, all of these little white dots would be showing up black. And or like this moment right here where the light's hitting here, that would be really obvious because that would show up black and you would be able to see, oh, I need to preserve some light right there or just go a little darker with the Cascadia next to it to push it forward. All right, so let me switch to my H pencil and start putting some of this lighter value in. And then we're going to add a little vignette to the outside edge here. Just because I felt like, well, there is a vignette in the photograph too. And I was like, it needs something. Feels like these flowers are just hanging out in this frame. We need a vignette. Okay, so you could keep like a diagonal hatching line all the way across the value that we're adding on this rose and really treat it like the Charlie Brown audience. It feels like something they would do in Charlie Brown. And it does get pretty dark on that rose. But starting with lighter value and then increasing to darker value makes sense because there are a lot of lighter moments on it. So that'll keep you from going too dark. Right, and then I'll go back in on top of that light value and add these darker moments. Give it a gradient. And then we'll just do the same thing we did to the other one, start to clean up some of these edges, really push some of the dark moments on this bigger shadow. And I maybe am not going to fully finish this one because I want to add this vignette and then I want to see y'all's drawings before we're done here. But I think y'all can see how to finish this out, how it's coming along. We're just filling in until we get to as dark as we want to go on these shadows. Okay, and then yeah, let's put this vignette on here and that'll be a good place to land. So when I step back, I feel like this little area here is a little wonky, but I think I just need to finish rounding out that shape. Yeah, it'll definitely come together the more blend it all. Just needs some blending. Okay, let's talk about this vignette because I think the rest of that is pretty straightforward. So I'm just going to think about these little corner edges being filled in like the vignette in the photograph. So let's do the same thing we did to the rose. We'll start out nice and light with the H pencil and try to switch approach it from the same direction and think about like you're filling in like a cereal bowl or something sticking in over here on the side or a little photo corner. So you want it to feel nice and smooth and continuous, and then we want it to just fade into the blank paper. So just that baby's breath all the way around. So I'm kind of changing the direction that I'm approaching the paper to keep my pencil moving in the same direction the whole time. So my whole arm is activated right now because I'm switching all the different directions that I'm approaching the paper. And we don't need it in that bottom corner because we got the leaf blocking that corner. So, and then we're just going to stretch it out so they kind of meet there in the middle a little bit, but mostly it's just our corners. And maybe you could kind of go different directions, use that messy craftsmanship thing. If it's hard for you to keep it all connected, this is a good place to kind of let it, all those different directional lines overlap, and that'll create the same effect if you keep it nice and soft. So you just eventually want to create that little triangle corner and keep it nice and soft. And then we'll add a little bit of B pencil on top of it in the very corners. So it's a little darker and then fading out. It really does not take much of a B pencil to make that feel like a strong separation there too. So maybe you have to erase it out and do it again so that it's not quite so dramatic, or just take your time with your H pencil, because I feel like I went a little too dark. Oh, and then I dropped my eraser. I'm gonna feel like a cooking show and switch over to this one. So yeah, it looks like I probably used my H pencil for this whole thing and just used patience to just get it nice and soft in those corners. All right. We'd love to see how y'all's drawings turned out. If you want to hold up your drawing, we can spotlight you. Right, there's Barbara. Nice, Barbara. Oh, I love how you're just taking your time building up all of those dark values. So just, yeah, there's no rush to getting there. And I can see some of those edges starting to come forward as well. All right, this is Sophie. Oh, very nice. Yeah. Oh, those little keyhole moments of light peeking through on the Caspedias at the top is really nice. Oh, and the little crescent moon shape of shadow on that bottom one is also lovely. Okay, and this is Autumn. Oh, wow, Autumn. Oh, you just blow me away. I love seeing your work, and that is just absolutely gorgeous. The soft way that you were just letting that be so blurry. Oh my goodness. I can't wait to see Autumn's first solo exhibition at the MoMA. I am ready for it. All right, let's see. Oh my goodness, Deb. Is that a photograph? Holy moly, Deb. That is incredible. That is so gorgeous. You nailed it. Oh my gosh. I love how you even like lined those up so close together. It really feels like snapshots. I cannot get over it. That is just gorgeous. Really see you pushing that soft value and building up to darker values. I'm like, where do we go from here? Who's gonna follow that? Oh, here we go. Sandra. Oh, yes. Yes, this is what I'm talking about. Y'all are really pushing those super dark. Are you using charcoal? It looks, or maybe a carbon pencil? You're getting a really nice black to happen there. That's beautiful. Yeah. Oh my goodness. And then Patty, again with the drama and the strong contrast. Ooh, and I see you looking at the contours on that Caspedia. I know I didn't get into the contour lines tonight. Y'all were probably like, what is she doing? Not talking about contour lines. I just wanted to focus on the value, but you got it. Oh my goodness. That's amazing. Thank you, Pia, for that feedback. Thank you for such an awesome class. And this is Monica. Really nice as well. Yeah. Really gorgeous work. Okay, and then this is Leanna. Oh, my little Zoom boxes are in the way. Oh my gosh, that's gorgeous as well. Y'all are amazing. Wow, y'all just make my job so fulfilling. This is my favorite part of the class. Cheryl, beautiful work. Yes. Really feeling the three-dimensional form of that spherical shape coming forward. And this is Laura. Yes, Laura. Always love to see your work. And those are just beautiful. I knew you would get a lot out of this because you're so good with flowers. Yeah, that's really nice. Although I want to see more drama, Laura. I want you to go super dark. You'll get there. Always trying to get Laura to go darker with her lines. We've done some other classes and lessons together. Okay, I don't see. Sorry, Laura. I'm trying to get back to myself now to unspotlight you. LaCoria, feel free to help me out if you get there before me. Oh, wait, here's Lois. Here's somebody else holding theirs up. Oh my gosh, Lois, that's gorgeous too. I am just blown away by y'all tonight. This one was just so successful for so many of you. And then Grace, just beautiful work. Yes, Grace, you too. Look at all that contrast. Wow. Okay. Oh, I found myself. If I did not spotlight you, feel free to send it to me. You can find my website, my contact through my link tree that I shared with you. And I would love to have some photographs of y'all's work from tonight. I was really impressed. And now I'm so excited about next week too, because we're going to use these same images, which we're going to be very familiar with now. And we're going to do it again in pen and ink, although we're going to do a slightly different one for this second one. So yeah, hopefully I'll see y'all again next week for the pen and ink version of this class, studying that high contrast value on these flowers. Thank y'all so much and have a great evening. Good night.